The Cotton Club is a legend in Colorado Springs. Everyone has a story associated with the Cotton Club.
Fannie Mae Duncan's life is an amazing journey from the cotton fields of Alabama to the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma to fame and social impact in Colorado Springs. There, she owned and operated a jazz venue called the Cotton Club, where world-class African-American entertainers performed for nearly 30 years. The club's motto, "Everybody Welcome," challenged the era's de facto segregation.
Fannie Mae was the catalyst for the peaceful integration of Colorado Springs during the very volatile civil rights movement. During that time, in other cities, there was violence and there was bloodshed and there were flaming Molotov cocktails being thrown in streets. But here in Colorado Springs, Fannie Mae was serving chilled cocktails to people of every ethnicity who would come in because of their mutual love of the arts and sit side by side to enjoy the evening.
And I said, all I'm looking for is people that the age, and I'm not looking for color.
Fannie Mae's alliance with local law enforcement, generosity to her city, and can-do attitude moved mountains.
She was destined. She was destined to be a visionary. She was destined to be an entrepreneur.
She was destined to make history.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with support from the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, and the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, with additional support from these organizations and viewers like you. Thank you.
Fannie Mae Duncan. How in the world do you describe Fannie Mae Duncan? She was flamboyant, she was good-natured, she had a great sense of humor. She was statuesque. She was 5'7", but she always had on very high heels, so she was much taller than that when she looked down upon you. She's a wonderful human being who never forgot her roots.
Fannie Mae Duncan achieved a lot in life despite the odds. When she was born in 1918, people who looked like her worked for other people. They didn't employ other people. She wasn't supposed to own the real estate that she owned. She wasn't supposed to drive the cars that she drove. She wasn't supposed to be this vanguard, socially progressive influence in Colorado Springs.
Fannie Mae, of course, was the granddaughter of slaves. Alabama, as you can imagine, that long ago, the turn of the century, was very different than it is now.
Both of Fannie Mae's parents, Mattie Lou Brinson and Herbert Bragg, grew up picking cotton in Alabama. They married in 1909 and remained tenant farmers, unable to own the land they worked.
It's a kind of serfdom that was put in place after the Civil War that barely changed the lives of African Americans and kept them impoverished in a ratio of unequal power that they could never escape from.
Probably the family would have remained in Alabama indefinitely, as most did, but a tragedy occurred. It was a very serious racial incident. And a little boy who was a part of the extended family, who was only 4 years old, got into an argument with a little white girl. There was an argument over a toy that actually, ironically, belonged to the little boy, but when he slapped her to get it back, that was the end of his life for him. He was brutally murdered, and it was to teach a lesson, to make a point. Respect was based on fear in those days.
The Civil War may have ended, but racial violence had not. Fannie Mae's parents fled to Oklahoma. Herbert went first on foot. Once safety was assured, Mattie followed with their 3 small children.
The Bragg family left the Deep South, Alabama, like a lot of other African Americans did in the early 20th century. They're fleeing violence, they're fleeing terror, they're fleeing discrimination and outright racial prejudice, and they're moving toward some measure of economic, political, and social freedom.
The hope was that they would have a chance in life, because it was very clear that in Alabama, they were not going to have that opportunity. Oklahoma offered hope.
And they did find a measure of that, as did thousands of other African Americans that were fleeing the South post-Civil War, coming north and west looking for opportunities.
Fannie Mae was born shortly thereafter on the 5th of July. She missed the 4th of July by one day, which she let everybody know.
As the first Bragg child born in Oklahoma, she had no memories of what was left behind in Alabama. She had a fresh start, if you will.
She didn't feel the threat that her older brothers and sisters really had internalized. And from the very beginning, she was free spirit. Ultimately, there were 7 children, and Fannie Mae was smack dab in the middle as the 4th, but she was definitely the leader of the pack. Outspoken, gregarious, inventive, a mischief maker. She became a great problem solver, and her problem-solving skills were as a result of trying to get out of trouble most of the time.
Oklahoma meant Mr. Bragg could own land, and they had a fruit stand, and they fed their family, and they also had enough to sell.
She was also a great little mathematician. She understood numbers and subtraction and addition and what have you from the time she was very young, and because she understood math, her father let her make change, and that was her introduction to the business world.
And even though they were pretty isolated out on the farm and their mom made their clothes, they still had things like doll buggies at Christmas, and they had toys to play with, and they had peppermint candy in Mr. Bragg's pockets when he came back from town.
Her father was very successful. He even bought a piano, he bought a new car, and one day when he was out on the road returning from the general store in Luther, a storm came up and the roads were very slick, and he lost control of the car, had a one-car accident, and was badly cut to the point that he was bleeding out on the side of the road. A Good Samaritan came along and, not knowing what to do, smeared axle grease into the wound, which of course stemmed the bleeding, saved his life, but only momentarily, of course, because without adequate medical attention in that era, gangrene set in. Tragically, Herbert died at Thanksgiving in 1926, leaving Mama, Maddie, with 7 children.
The only recollections she would share about her time in Oklahoma were just with her father. I think that that was a huge event in her life when her dad died. I believe she was like 8 years old.
Fannie Mae's older siblings dropped out of school to support the family. Fannie Mae lived with nearby relatives in order to continue her education.
It was very, very difficult for the whole family because, as you can imagine, they were a very tight-knit family. They lived through the Dust Bowl, they lived through the Depression, a difficult time, and without a father, almost impossible.
But hope was on the way. In 1929, Aunt Fang Harris came to visit from Manitou Springs, Colorado. She saw Maddie struggling to make ends meet with 7 children and extended an opportunity for the eldest, Frances, that would change the future of the entire Bragg family. Frances returned to Manitou Springs with her aunt and worked at Bingo Jack's Bingo Parlor, then for R.P. Aldridge, a mercantile store owner.
This gave her the opportunity to send money home to Mom and the children over a period of 2 years. She didn't spend 1 cent on herself.
We were all lonesome for Frances, and she was just like a mother to us. My mother was there, but we had 2 mothers. Like, she took care of us while Mother was working, and we were always hollering for her. And she was lonesome for us kids, so she sent back and got the rest of us from Oklahoma.
Uncle Early volunteered his truck and his son, Linwood Bragg, to drive the family all the way from Guthrie, where they were living, to Colorado Springs, Colorado. It was a long trip, and of course no place to stay along the way. But at long last, they could see the mountains of Colorado and eventually Pikes Peak.
And it's that classic experience that generations of people immigrating west have had, looking at beautiful Pikes Peak and drawing near and nearer to it.
Well, you can imagine seeing the gigantic mountains. They'd never seen anything like that before in their lives. They were afraid they'd fall down on them. And of course, they were were screaming. But once they got closer to the city and saw the trolley cars and saw the gigantic buildings, the big hotel that looked like a castle to them.
We had a population of about 30 to 35,000 people at the time, so there's streetcars, there are traffic lights, there are big buildings, there's activity along the streets. It would have seemed really exciting and filled with opportunity.
They were so excited, but most especially Fannie Mae. She found out she was no country girl at heart. The city was definitely for her.
Colorado Springs is interesting in that it's founded by a Civil War general who happens to be an abolitionist, a Hicksite Quaker, who believes really deeply that all people are equal in the eyes of God.
One way that William Jackson Palmer brought with him his background of integrity was on the issue of race. He was someone who broke with his church's belief in pacifism in order to fight in the Civil War. While he was not someone who would celebrate diversity the way that many of us do today, he did embrace it for people of his time. He modeled it for people of his time.
But when people come here, they bring their cultural biases, their prejudices with them. Racism takes a foothold here just as it does in other places. Where they could work, where they could live was limited, not by any kind of Jim Crow law, but by custom, de facto discrimination. But there was also a flourishing African-American community life here that must have felt invigorating for a family like the Braggs when they came in the 30s.
We lived next door to Spanish people, and on one side was black and the other was Spanish, and on the corner was white. So we began to all just play together, and it was just a different atmosphere.
Fannie Mae spent her first summer in Colorado Springs washing dishes at a barbecue and handing out soap and towels to tuberculosis patients at the Manitou Spa. Throughout her teenage years, she held after-school jobs, including waitressing and housekeeping. Schools in Colorado Springs were integrated, and as an organized and popular social butterfly, Fannie Mae was high school class treasurer. It was her basketball prowess that caught the eye of one of her classmates' older brothers. Edward Roy Duncan was 6 years older, and he already knew he wanted to marry Fannie Mae.
She graduated from Colorado Springs High School, the first in her family to graduate from high school in 1938, and was disgusted to find that with a high school diploma, she could not get a job any better than the ones she had already had. So she worked again as a domestic or a maid.
But she's not satisfied. She wants more.
Ed, in the meantime, pointed out to her that if she would just marry him, they would have two incomes to put away. And she finally gave in on October 9th, 1939, and married Ed Duncan and became Fannie Mae Duncan.
I couldn't make up my mind what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and Ed was a type that anything I wanted to do was all right with him. Just do it. He didn't try to hold me back. That's one thing I appreciate about him. He worked with me.
Ed encouraged Fannie Mae to apply to run the Haven Club, a soda fountain for black soldiers at segregated Army Camp Carson. She interviewed and got the job.
It was a very good job because I was behind the cash register and I was on the soda fountain, and I learned to make banana splits and just everything on the soda fountain. Then I went from there and I worked into being one of the assistant managers, and I loved that.
She developed tremendous sympathy for the military and for people who were willing to give their life in service of their country. She did very, very well.
Then I decided, well, if I could make this kind of money for the government, I should be able to make it for myself. There was a place in town they called a service club, and it had a soda fountain on it. It would seat about, I'd say, 50 people, including the counter and all. So I told Ed that this is what I wanted to do, and he said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, well, you can quit the railroad station and then come in and you cook and I wait table.
She talked Ed into giving up his job. He was now working at a really good job with a pension at the railroad. But Fannie Mae didn't cook. She needed a cook that she didn't have to pay.
He said, well, if that's what you want to do, I'll do it.
They didn't own the building, but all the profits would be theirs. The only problem she could see was in this case, because she would be running a concession, she was going to have a business license. In the beginning, Earl Mosley, who was the city manager, took one look at her, 26-year-old, a woman and black at that, and decided she did not have the credentials to run a USO concession. He turned her down repeatedly, but she was far more persistent than he was patient. And so he gave in, thinking, okay, it'll just be a trial run. She'll make it a couple of weeks, maybe a month at best, and then I'll be through with her.
He said, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you have the place on a 6-month trial. And you can go in, and I want to see what you can do, and in the 6 months, I'll have a report.
Immediate success, because the blacks in the city who worked downtown had a place they could go and sit down, be treated with respect and dignity, and be welcome.
Before 6 months, I got a letter, and I thought, oh, is he going to tell me to get out of here and tell me that? I was like, all right. And he was congratulating me. He said that he'd had a whole lot of people to come in and tell what a wonderful job I could do. And he said, keep the works up and forget about what I said. And I'm sorry, I should have let you have it a year ago.
She's the one who'd say, let's take the next step and take the next step. She had this drive inside of her, and she never stopped.
She also had a lot of family support that helped her with her overhead. She had a husband, Ed Duncan, who was a great handyman. I mean, they were a great team. He could do all the fix-it stuff. He didn't have to hire a plumber, didn't have to hire an electrician. All she had to do was turn around and whisper to her husband, honey, I need this fixed, and he did it.
At this point, Fannie Mae became pregnant. And it would have been a beautiful story to tell, but tragically, her baby girl, Yvonne Dolores, died at birth. Fannie Mae, of course, was bereft, but she handled stress very differently than most people. She immersed herself with more visions, more ideas, more work.
And then when the opportunity came open to purchase Douglas Hall and the Father Divine restaurant, she jumped at it.
The building for sale was just across the street from where Fannie Mae and Ed were working. Envisioning a larger operation, one she owned herself, Fannie Mae called in a favor. She contacted Mrs. D. Arthur Jones, an elderly woman for whom Ed had chauffeured and worked for in the Broadmoor neighborhood.
She suggested that they go down and ask Mrs. D. Arthur Jones in the Broadmoor for the money they needed.
Could we ask you what the total price of the building was when you bought it?
I believe it was $25,000.
And were you a little bit afraid to take on the responsibility?
Yes, I was. Yes, because I cried many a day because it took all my money, you know.
They opened a cafe and bar, Duncan's Cafe and Bar.
And the night it opened, you couldn't get in the place. And I haven't looked back since.
It was 1946. A world war had ended. Fannie Mae was 28 years old, and Duncan's Cafe and Bar was a newfound success in downtown Colorado Springs. Fannie Mae and Ed did not stop there.
On weekends, they would go up to Denver's Five Points, which is often called the Harlem of the West, and there were very established and polished businesses there. One nightclub in particular, the Rossonian, was the place to be seen in a Cadillac if you had one. Ed took Fannie Mae, just as a break from all their hard work. Ed thought they were sitting there relaxing and enjoying the entertainment, not realizing that Fannie Mae was sitting there sizing up the place, how it operated, the patterns that the waitresses made as they walked through this little club, the way the singers and the vocalists presented themselves.
Fannie Mae's younger sister, Selena, was a vocalist, eventually singing and touring with Lionel Hampton. When Hampton played the Rossonian, Fannie Mae had an idea.
She realized that they could probably get anybody if she could offer a second gig down here. She bought a sign some 20 to 30 feet, flamingo pink neon, that announced Cotton Club, and that there would be 2 shows nightly, and there would be dining, and there would be dancing.
When you walked into the front door from Colorado Avenue, on the right side of the club, there was these big, beautiful leather red booths. And I mean, you could sit maybe 6 or 7 people in a booth because they were huge. The booths were always full in there. The jazz band was going.
But not just anybody. She booked what became a Music Hall of Fame.
Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Horace Henderson, that's Domino. There's a number of them. Oh, so it's so many I can't even think of.
All of the greats played in Colorado Springs. She wanted it to rival clubs in Denver, Kansas City, and New York City. It meant that people in Colorado Springs were seeing cutting-edge music that otherwise would have been unavailable.
She used to have big entertainers from all over the country that came there, like Cab Calloway, and Flip Wilson got his start there.
Here's Flip!
These were black entertainers, and they were not welcome in this unusually semi-segregated society. They were not welcome to entertain at the Antlers or the Broadmoor or the major facilities. So if you wanted to see these amazing talents, the Cotton Club was the only place in town to do that. The complaints kept piling up, and so Dad Bruce, as he was called, the chief of police, called her in and said he heard she was mixing colors and she couldn't be doing that.
He said, you got white people, you got Mexicans, you got black people, and you got everything in the rainbow in there. I said, I have? And he said, yes. He said, you cannot do that here. And I said, you didn't tell me you sold me some black license. I said, you charged me as much for my license as stand at the Manhattan. He said, yes. I said, well, the color, you didn't tell me to check for color. And he said, no, I didn't. He said, but I tell you, you're not going to have all them white people in there, and you're not going to have all these people mixing. They will not mix. I said, they're in there mixing, and they're happy. I said, I didn't tell them to come in there. They came in on their own. He said, I tell you what. He said, you go down there, and you tell all those people that's not black that you can't serve them.
It was quite a session because she spoke up immediately, something he was not considered appropriate, and he never really had that experience because he's a pretty tough guy.
And I said, all I'm looking for is people that the age, and I'm not looking for color. So I said, and if some of them sue me for refusing to serve them because of their color, will you stand behind it?
And he angrily told her, yes, he most certainly would serve only blacks, keep it black. Well, she was not only angry as all get out, she stormed out.
So I said, all right, thank you, sir. So Ed and I walked out of the place.
Word of the order for segregation of the Cotton Club traveled like wildfire. The police station received so many calls of protest from the club's affluent white clientele that Chief Bruce was forced to reverse his decision.
He said, I'm telling you one thing. If anybody come in there, I don't care if they're black, white, blue, purple, or yellow, as long as they're 21 years old, you serve them. And I was wrong. And he said, you go and you run the place, and I'll help you stay there. He said, because you're doing a great job. And I had no more problems.
Well, it was a huge victory. The first truly integrated major business in Colorado Springs because of Fannie Mae Duncan.
It certainly isn't known across the nation or in the history books. But taking him on, ironically, for the issue that she wasn't allowed to integrate white people with black people in her own club, based on Harlem's Cotton Club, where the fanciest white folks from New York City went all the time to hear black musicians.
The multi-ethnic waitstaff of the Cotton Club now openly served an integrated clientele. This was a first in Colorado Springs history, and soldiers returning from deployment who brought foreign wives home also now had a place to go for a night on the town. From the segregated South to the dusty plains of Oklahoma to owning the first integrated nightclub in the city, Fannie Mae Duncan took a persistent stand for civil rights. Her generous spirit grew to echo well beyond Pikes Peak, the mountain that had awed a family driving toward hope. Fannie Mae would sustain her extraordinary journey for many years to come.
I don't care who you were welcome at the Cotton Club.
The soldiers, of course, had a place where they could be comfortable bringing in their wives from other cultures.
It was off limits to soldiers for a time, but the reputation was so great, they couldn't keep them away.
And you know, when you have a place that's off limits, that's where everybody wants to go.
Fort Carson was the cause of me being able to survive. The white boys from out there and Chicanos and everybody else, they came in. They used to come by, the white boys would want to come in and they'd peep in. Anybody else would come and peep in. They wasn't sure where they could come in because they ran me crazy on the phone, calling, wanting to come, but wanting to know if they was welcome.
She wanted to make sure that everybody understood that they could come in now, that there were no barriers whatsoever.
So I cleaned out the whole window where I had advertisement there. I cleaned it all out. And I went to the Out West and I got a great big sign, one of those cardboard signs, and I just put on there, everybody welcome, and put a big spotlight on it. Wasn't a thing in the window but that. And the people passing by could see it, and business started booming.
People of every persuasion were there. It was a wonderful place, a hopping place. But Fannie Mae didn't stop there, so she had a barber shop and a beauty shop. Then they added a record shop and a gift shop, and there was a pool hall. And in the back, because teenagers, like teenagers, did not have a place to go to really enjoy themselves and be entertained, but without alcohol, she opened the Cherry Pit Barbecue. Of course, a lot of adults went too, because good food.
I saw a lot of happiness, I saw a lot of fun, I saw the kids that came in from all over the country and were welcomed in an environment that was not anti-anybody, and that's what she was. She was the first one that really showed me that you got to care about all people.
I don't care who it was that walked in. They were able to come to her, sit next to her on the bar, converse with her. She welcomed everybody, and she truly believed in that. And it didn't matter what race or color or your stature, she welcomed everyone. Fannie Mae would sit at the end of the bar, and she had these gorgeous knit suits that would have the fox collars. She had the diamonds, and her hair was always coiffed.
She once said that she needed to dress the part. She loved designer clothing. She went to all the elite clothing stores in town, like Gray Rose and Ray's Dress Shop in the Broadmoor, Hibbard's and Giddings. She loved big hats, colorful clothing, gold jewelry, furs, the more the better. And she felt like she had an image to maintain, and she did. I mean, when Fannie Mae Duncan walked into a room, everybody knew it.
When she walked into a room, you could hear people whisper, Fannie Mae Duncan's here, Fannie Mae Duncan's here, it's Fannie Mae.
You know, while some people might have been envious of her, she had a really open, generous heart, and I think that people responded to that. She had a mansion.
I am sitting in her mansion, 44 rooms, if you count the enclosed porches, 8,000 square feet, 2 stories high, grounds that Mama filled with flowers and gardens and vegetables. There's a story behind this house. Want to hear it?
Most people don't realize how difficult it was to simply travel if you were African American, and to even understand from one place to the next what the attitudes might be.
The city still had the major hotels sticking to their segregated ideas.
The Antlers Hotel was across the street, but we weren't able to book into that establishment at that time. So it was a hard time for her when she was bringing in class entertainment and couldn't get them places to stay.
I was so ashamed that I didn't know what to do. They couldn't stay at the Broadmoor. They couldn't find no place to stay in town. What could they do? Even these little places out small, you know, all of them just refused them. So they had to come to Denver.
Denver had a strong enough black community in 5 Points that there were places for folks to stay.
Fannie called up Chief Bruce, who after her first confrontation with the law over segregating her club, had since become an avid supporter.
I went up to Chief Bruce and I told him what was happening. And he says, I understand that. He says, this is a shame. He says, I just don't know what to do.
She decided to buy a mansion that she knew was for sale, and she was going to convert it into a hostelry, a boarding house, a hotel for those wonderful people. And thank goodness she did, because Colorado Springs might not have seen them continue to come. They're historic presences in our community's history.
Not only all the black entertainers, but many dignitaries stayed here, one being Medgar Evers. He was invited in 1963, I believe it was, to speak at the Air Force Academy to the black cadets. And he stayed an extra day just for Mama's collard greens. Tragically, when he returned home because of his activism and high profile in society, he was murdered. It was a terribly distressing situation in Fannie Mae because we lost many people. We lost Dr. Martin Luther King, we lost President Kennedy.
In the aftermath of national tragedy, Fannie Mae searched for ways to support her community.
They began the 400 Club.
Their goal was to get 400 individuals who would donate generously and widely. And they provided aid to people that were ill or injured or in the hospital, for African Americans, for white residents, for anyone.
Every Christmas and every Thanksgiving, they gave out baskets, and you could just see them, her and her Cadillac, riding up and down that side of town, which was, we call the north side, giving different families baskets for different holidays.
Instead of complaining about something, she did something about it. When she saw people in need, she stepped forward. When she saw something that could be fixed, she stepped out and she stepped up. She was so generous in an era when redlining was prevalent, when African Americans couldn't get loans at banks, and they turned to her.
I've asked her for loans, a lot of times money, you know, and whatnot.
You know, she joked about being Bragg Duncan Savings and Loan because she offered small loans and large loans to people who needed it. She could always be counted on to support others.
There's not a family member that I know of that did not get touched by her love.
At some point, and you know, all of us kids were able to have little jobs doing different things down where Aunt Fannie owned a business. So they kind of taught us how to work.
She provided employment for an awful lot of my family, and she certainly provided employment for my mother, who was my sole source of support. We lived in her house from the time I was 8 years old. So I'd have to say that she was very important to the family, not only to me, but many others, because there are many family members that were under the roof of her various real estate holdings. Case of my mother, every time Fannie bought a new car, she gave my mother her old car. So the car just kept staying in the family. And then when my mother used it up and got the next one from Aunt Fannie, she passed it on to her brother Cornelius. So cars just roll right down the hill. And then when they all used them up, I usually ended up with one of them. And then there were many other family members that got money that she was providing for them.
Fannie Mae Duncan was my father, Cornelius Sprague's sister. So she was my aunt. Neither of my parents was really able to be present fully in my life, so she kind of just stepped into that role and functioned as both mom and dad for me. Education was incredibly important to Mom. She not only encouraged education for me and made it a priority for me, she encouraged everyone who was in her orbit.
She was always interested in helping people who were trying to do something. And if you told her you were trying to get an education, she'd go 200 miles to assist you. So she knew I was going to Colorado College at that time, during the 50s. So I used to tend bar, clean up in the club, and any other activities that she wanted me to perform that I could that didn't interfere with my education, I undertook that. So I owe a great deal to her as far as helping me get through those very difficult years when students are trying to combine work and finishing an education. She did a great deal for me and many, many other individuals who were seeking education or people in the business world.
We know she put at least 6 students through college, paid every year their tuition, but a few dozen more, she paid a bit at a time or when they came to her in need. She gave generously, not seeking recognition or anything in return.
Mom was a feminist in all but name. I don't think she would ever label herself a feminist, but she really believed in self-agency.
I used to stand there and watch her, how she dealt with men in a time when women didn't have a lot of clout with men, but things that I heard her say to vendors when they were trying to force product on her, I heard her shut them down and shut them off, and sometimes I would cringe. But she did it, and she got away with it, and it was because she was right.
I mean, she'd listen, but believe me, the last line was hers.
And she was fortunate during that era to have the local DA, to have chief of police as friends. And they assured that she, as an African-American woman, would have a successful establishment in the city of Colorado Springs. Today, I don't think I'd see that.
Colorado Springs Police Chief Irvin Bruce had reversed his order of segregation at the Cotton Club and went on to become an early supporter of Fannie Mae. He used his influence to help her, in one case when a local linen service refused to wash the club's towels.
He told me, we don't have a place separate to wash them. I said, what do you mean wash them? He said, well, we don't have no place to wash black towels. I said, those towels you wash in any place around here, the help in the kitchen is black. He said, that's right, isn't it? And he said, but I had orders from the boss not to serve you. I said, all right. I went up right out of that place and went down to the jailhouse looking for Chief Bruce. So, he says, what? I say, I have to take my towels home and wash them at night. And then I said, it's hard on me. And I was losing weight because I was working round the clock. So he said, that's not going to happen. He said, you can get as many towels as you want, many aprons you want, many caps as you want. He says, you get on back over there. He called him up and he says, if you want to stay in business, you give her what she asked for. And I mean, now.
It's an amazing story. It only happened here. A black female nightclub owner and a police chief working together to make it work.
It's a signal that things can be different, they can be better, and they could be more equal.
Police would come in, they would do their rounds, they would go out. Then they may go home and get dressed and come back to the Cotton Club. Oh, it was fun. It was fun. And the bands were really, really good.
The house band was Jimmy Jules. He was a great musician, and he would have you laughing, but he'd have you rocking more than anything.
And I was hired to perform at the Cotton Club 3 days a week, 3 sets a night, 3 songs per set. Fannie Mae paid me $75 per week. The stage was very small, and we had 4 band members. I remember Jimmy Jules would be on the B3 organ, Horace Butler would be on lead guitar, Mickey White would be on the bass guitar, and Jimmy Jones was our drummer. And I would have to fit in front of them onto that small stage and plus move around. So we had some good times at the Cotton Club. I consider Fannie Mae Duncan a modern day entrepreneur. She knew what it took to get people in the door, keep people in the door, and prevent them from going out the door. She had something for everyone.
So on my cards, I always said on them, easy to find and hard to leave.
They were extremely successful. And you would think that life would have evened out for them. But Ed, because of the easy access to alcohol, he had become very, very alcoholic. He died of alcohol in January of 1955. Again, life changed dramatically for her.
She kept her husband's Cadillac up in an enclosure in her yard, his first Cadillac, in the yard for many, many years. And as a young person, I thought, why didn't she get rid of that piece of junk? But I think it was a memory of her husband.
Many, many family members were brought in to help operate the business, and they all deserve an enormous amount of credit for keeping that business open and operating and so successful.
Fannie Mae's younger sister, Selena, was a pillar of support. Along with the extended family, the two sisters stuck together to keep the Cotton Club on track.
Through the late 1960s, Colorado Springs and other cities across the country are getting rougher. The crime rate's up. Buildings are being vacated downtown. People are moving to the suburbs. And as a result, the core of the city, the downtown, is less attractive, it's less vibrant.
During this decline, the city decided that the area where she had her club really was becoming seedy, and they didn't want people coming into the city with the antlers and all the important businessmen and the money coming into the city getting the wrong impression. So by 1975, eminent domain was the decision by the city to get rid of the club and tear down the buildings in that area.
Colorado Springs' urban renewal effort took out about 4 blocks of downtown.
The power of eminent domain is typically used by governments to acquire land for public projects. When the 2 buildings housing Fannie Mae's businesses were torn down by the city, the area was rebuilt for commercial business use.
The city was growing, and this is what I'm saying, they were thinking, we're tired of this and we're gonna get rid of this.
It was a part of her demise, and it was systemically done. It was just sad, and she was sad. She was very brokenhearted behind the urban renewal. I can remember her being down in her spirits because they were literally taking her property away from her.
She tried to fight it, she hired lawyers, and eventually she gave in. Her building was purchased, her business was purchased for about $168,000 and torn down in 1975.
She was very hurt that they took, because she got hardly anything out of it. Those were her words to my mother. They did a closing of the Cotton Club. People came from Denver to Pueblo. People were crying because we had no place to go. I remember Fannie Mae coming through and she says, I'm sorry. You know, when she got up and made her announcement, she just said, I'm sorry. There was nothing I could do.
And Fannie Mae lost her ability to earn at that level, to pay for a mansion this size. And things were very bleak.
As a family, those of us that are closest to her are quite bitter about the way that she was treated and mistreated. A lady who gave so much, was always there, first to be counted on, to give and make donations to worthy causes. Not many people really understand.
The closure of the Cotton Club was highly traumatic for her.
I regret that they closed the Cotton Club down because it was my idea was to pass it down to the family. After I'm gone, it would still be there to go down to my family. And this is what I had in mind.
She was encouraged to open up another business at a different location off of South Hancock. She named it after her mother. She thought that would bring her good luck.
But her new endeavor didn't work out really well. You know, after you close something major, something minor will not take over.
She was always there for whoever needed her. Unfortunately, when things got tough, there were very few that were there available to help her when she needed them most. Part of it may be because of her pride. She didn't reach out and ask. The other part would be is that some of us just weren't perceptive enough to recognize that she was in need.
Fannie Mae came to Colorado Springs from the fields of Oklahoma, the granddaughter of slaves and the first in her family born outside the South. She worked hard to own her own club, only only to have everything she had worked for taken away.
By this time, Fannie Mae had lost her sister Selena, who had become a beloved singer at the Cotton Club, and they'd spent wonderful years together. And she lost her brothers. Ultimately, she lost her mother. It was just a bleak time.
Fannie Mae and her adopted daughter, Renee, moved to Connecticut to live with Selena's son, Les. It was a chance to reset. After 1 year, they returned to Colorado.
We settled in southeast Denver.
And Fannie Mae, the first thing she did, she was on a telethon for the United Negro College Fund. She was very actively involved in Denver to the point that she could. And she gave her talent and her services and organizational skills to Excelsior, a school for troubled girls.
She helped the girls manage a little thrift store that they had on the campus. And they came in and did shifts and worked with her, and she was able to teach them how to run a business.
In 1993, a play was created about Fannie Mae's life and was performed in Colorado Springs and Denver. Fannie Mae worked with instructor Kay Esmial and students to tell her life story.
It was a beautiful collaboration between an aging woman and young kids, realizing that they were making life better for somebody else, something she'd done her entire life, of course.
But gradually, over time, she slowed down. She stopped going to her volunteer job. And then at the age of 84, she suffered a fall. And because of that, she required 24-hour care, and she remained in care until her death.
On Tuesday, September 13th, 2005, Fannie Mae Bragg Duncan died in Denver at the age of 87.
The day Mom died was probably the worst day of my life. You know, we all knew that the end was coming, but, you know, it was still quite a shock when it did.
In her lifetime, Fannie Mae was honored by the American Business Women's Association. Posthumously, she was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. The Colorado Springs Diversity Forum pays tribute to Fannie Mae with a festival in her honor.
It reflects everybody welcome. It reflects about the inclusiveness of our community and that we still continue to move forward. I think as new generations come on board, new people come into the city, you know, they may not realize or recognize that this is what made Colorado Springs who it is.
The fact that we keep talking about her shows that she has left a profound impact on us. We need to continue to use her as a model of how we can solve problems and how we can come together, how we can be bold.
A bronze statue of Fannie Mae Duncan is planned for the entrance of the Pikes Peak Center for the Performing Arts, just a stone's throw from where the Cotton Club was torn down in 1975.
When they put the statue up, maybe it'll be people coming from all different parts of the country and standing there taking pictures and whatnot. So we'll see. If I'm still around, I'll probably be one of them.
In the world of history, you're always going to find something or somebody that really honestly intrigues your interest.
Out of oppression came this woman to establish her own empire within a little small town, military town, where there were no black establishments whatsoever. What a feat.
There's another piece in there about opening doors, opening new doors in society, maybe for everyone, maybe for women in particular. She certainly did that. And when she opened that door, there was a sign that said, "Everybody welcome."
I hope she took solace in the fact that she's a legendary figure in Colorado Springs, that she's someone that changed this place for the better, left a lasting mark, changed the shape of our community, the feel of our community, the way that we interacted as community members. She had a profound impact on the city of Colorado Springs and our entire community that is still remembered.